The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Tree Fund webinar series. Today we have Success with Fruit Trees with Susan Poizner. Susan Poizner is an urban orchidist in Toronto, Canada, and the author of the award-winning fruit tree care book, Growing Urban Orchids. She's an instructor of fruit production at Niagara College in Ontario, and the creator of the award-winning online fruit tree care training program at orchardpeople.com. Susan is also the host of the Urban Forestry radio show and podcast, an ISA certified arborist. Very thankful to have Susan talking about fruit trees with us today. This is our first webinar on fruit trees. For all the attendees here, if you aren't able to stick around, note that attendance for the full live webinar is necessary for the CEUs. With that, Susan, take it away, and thanks for joining us.
Hey everybody, nice to see you. Nice to know you guys are out there. So today I'm going to talk about fruit trees and growing them successfully. So many of you are arborists, and you probably know what it looks like when people do not grow their fruit trees successfully. People come crying to you for help, and at that point often it's too late. So in this little talk we are going to explore some really actionable, quick tips to help you and others grow fruit trees successfully. Also to help you give some advice to people who have maybe done some stuff wrong so far. Now, fruit trees is a rabbit hole. It is a big topic, and I do a lot of education on that topic. So peppered throughout the talk, I will give you links to other resources where if you want to learn more, I can teach you. But let's go and have a look at an overview. Now I'm going to do something here with my screen. Let's hope this all works okay. So I'm going to press play. Okay, tell me if you have any trouble seeing things. Otherwise, I will just keep talking.
We're good. Thanks, Susan.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate the feedback. And okay, so first of all, a little bit about me. I am an ISA certified arborist, but my journey started many years ago when I decided to plant fruit trees in my local park. And this was Ben Nobleman Park in Toronto. It's sort of a kind of miserable little green space that nobody paid any attention to. That was scuzzy and right beside a police station, and just not a fun place to hang out. We planted some fruit trees, our first ones in 2009, and years and years later, these trees are beautiful, productive, and they also unite a group of really wonderful people who come out to the park during the growing season, maybe every week, sometimes on the slower part of the growing season, maybe every 2 weeks. We come out, we take care of our pollinator garden, and we take care of our beautiful fruit trees. Now, mulching, everybody knows trees need mulch, and we do some of that, but oh boy, when I started growing fruit trees, that's kind of all I knew about trees. I wasn't an arborist at that time, but I thought, okay, trees need mulch and we'll mulch those fruit trees. Well, that's not enough to keep a fruit tree healthy and productive, because fruit trees are not like native trees or ornamental trees. They are so much more demanding, and they're doing more. They're also cleaning the air. They're also stabilizing the soil and beautifying our communities, but they're producing, if they're healthy, a harvest for us. They need more nutrition than they get from simply decomposing wood mulch. So anyways, I found that out over time. We're going to talk about that today. So over the years, our young trees have grown older. We continue to plant them. We have over time made loads of mistakes. So all of my fruit tree care training is pretty much based on problems that I have had with our fruit trees and that other people that I have interacted with have had. My way of learning is to learn from experience. And boy, have I done that. So you're going to get some highlights from it. Protecting fruit trees from pests and diseases, people will say, well, the only way you can do it is by using, harsh and toxic chemicals. The truth is, healthy trees do protect themselves to a large extent, and together with some organic sprays and some manual ways of protecting the fruit, you can take care of those trees naturally in a healthy and non-toxic way. In this picture, one of our volunteers, she's tying on orchard socks, these little sockettes, nylon sockettes that we tie onto the growing fruit of our fruit trees early in the season. And that protects the fruit from being infested by insects that lay their eggs under the skin of the fruit. I think I may talk about this later in the talk, but just to show you, there are creative ways to keep these trees healthy. We don't have to do what commercial orchardists do, but we have to be hands-on. Now, other things that we have encountered, we've had to be super creative in caring for our trees. And if you have an orchard filled with fruit trees, you can't do some of the things that we do. So our apricot trees a couple of years ago, were in full bloom and a frost was forecast. That would have killed all the blossoms and all of our hopes for any harvest from those fruit trees. When the blossoms die, they cannot be pollinated, they cannot form fruit. So we got together, can't remember, was it May? We got together, we all brought tarps, we tied them together. I wish I had a picture in this slideshow, but we covered the trees with tarps to keep them slightly warmer, to protect those blossoms from dying. It was quite an amazing moment when we managed to take sticks and cover the trees and wrap them up. They looked kind of ridiculous and artistic all at the same time. 2 days later, we took the tarps off. The blossoms were fine. We actually had a very big harvest that year. The downside was that somebody harvested all the fruit before it was allowed to become ripe. We have that problem in our orchard. That person was spotted. We have people from different cultures that like unripe fruit for certain dishes that they make. And yeah, we got to teach people the rules. But anyways, we have also had lots and lots of successful harvests. Our cherries are the best bet in terms of fruit because the trees are so big. There is no way anybody could take that, strip the whole thing overnight and take all the fruit. Unless it's a little tree and a little girl, and that tree is one day going to be a big tree. So we do have community harvest nights. It is about sharing the fruit with the community, but it's also about sharing the ripe fruit, not everybody taking unripe fruit. These are things we can talk about when you have your Q&A part. And I should just keep an eye on the time. There we are. Okay, great. So now in today's talk, I've already told you a little bit about myself. It's a big group, so I don't think I'm going to get to know much about you guys. All I know is that you guys, many of you are arborists, and hopefully in the Q&A at the end, you will ask your questions and tell me about your experiences. Yeah, so I don't think we should have done a poll. I don't know if this software does that, but that's okay. So I'm going to give you in the talk today some really fast tips for caring for fruit trees. These are tips that will empower you, that will empower your clients. And in many of the tips, I give you resources of where to learn more. Do you want to go into this wonderful, empowering rabbit hole to learn more? If so, I have resources for you and I will tell you about them. And then finally, we'll have time for questions. Okay, I hope am I going too fast, too slow, just right? Are you still there? Would love some quick.
Doing great, Susan. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, super. So let's keep going. So I told you about the beginning of my journey, that fruit tree care, the community orchard I started. Since then, I have written a couple of books on fruit tree care. Growing Urban Orchards is the one that won a lovely award. I just released Grow Fruit Trees Fast. Maybe I'll tell you about that later. I have a radio show and podcast where I explore all sorts of issues around fruit trees, and I have online courses. So my job primarily now is training people to grow organic fruit trees successfully. So what are we aiming for? What are we looking for when it comes to fruit trees? We want them to look healthy. We want them to blossom. We want them to pollinate and produce lovely fruit. That's what we're looking for, and that's what we dream about when we buy a fruit tree and plant it in our yards. This is what we don't want our fruit trees to look like. And I wonder how many of you guys have seen this or the older version of this. So those older messy fruit trees that you guys often come to look at, they start here. If a fruit tree is neglected from the very day that it's planted, it will not thrive. So what's happening here, the branches are so long that they will break under the weight of the harvest because this is a very young tree. There is fruit on these branches that is too heavy for a young tree. So this young tree is not only needing its energy to establish itself, but it's pumping its energy into the fruit for the planter, for us, to feed us, and it's at the expense of its own health. So I guess if there's one lesson I want to teach you guys is that fruit tree care starts from the very day you plant your tree. So those people who call you in when their tree is 5, 6, 7, 10 years old and say, fix my tree, it is going to be an uphill battle. It can be done. But right from the beginning, we need to give our trees a good start. And that's what we're going to talk about today. This is also what we don't want our fruit trees to look like. As you guys know, fruit trees are vulnerable to many different diseases. I wonder if any of you know what this one is. I will tell you, it is fire blight, a very nasty bacterial disease that circulates. And it hits mostly apple and pear trees, and it's a killer. It's a bad one. Spreads in damp weather. So we want our fruit trees to be healthy, resilient, and in order to do that, they need hands-on care. So let's see what we're going to talk about today. These are some tips as to how to ensure your fruit tree growing experience is successful. And we'll start at the top right. Sorry, yes, the top right, tree choice. We'll talk about thinning the fruit, irrigation, feeding, pruning, monitoring, and weeding. Okay, hopefully you guys are on it and ready to go to the next step. Now let's talk about tree choice. I know that most people, when they go to the garden center, they're going to buy a tree that they are familiar with. How many gardens have you gone to where there is a Honeycrisp apple? Everybody loves Honeycrisp apples, and I'm one of them. I think they're absolutely delicious, but they are very challenging to grow, and they're vulnerable to a lot of the pest and disease problems that, many commercial fruit trees experience. Now, when Honeycrisp is grown, the reason it's more expensive than other apples is it is a real fuss to grow. But also, commercial growers use toxic pesticides and fungicides that we don't want to use in our backyards. So there are all sorts of different cultivars that are less famous, but that are much easier to grow organically. This is a great example, the Freedom apple. There are so many other ones, Red Free, Nova Mac. There is Easy Grow apples, and there are other types of fruits that you can grow that are easier to grow. Now, what makes them easier to grow? You can see in the description here, they are disease resistant. Now, just because an apple tree is disease resistant doesn't mean it's resistant to every single disease out there that it could get. So in this description, it says that the Freedom apple is immune to scab. That's great. Apple scab can be a big problem. Now it's resistant to powdery mildew, cedar apple rust, and fire blight. So the Freedom apple is one of the easiest of the disease-resistant trees, but you may get another tree that's only resistant to fire blight. And that's great if your community has fire blight. So my advice to you guys is, if somebody is starting from scratch, find out what are the common fruit tree diseases in your neighborhood and get a fruit tree that is resistant to those diseases. Now you may say, well, where do I get these fruit trees? Because I will promise you, it is highly unlikely that your local garden center is going to carry any of the disease-resistant varieties, because who's going to buy them? Nobody knows what a Freedom apple tastes like or a Liberty apple. So you'll have to go to a specialist fruit tree nursery. On my website at orchardpeople.com/fruit tree nursery, you can download this resource list that has 50 plus fruit tree nurseries across North America. Many of them are in Canada. And you can download their catalogs, look and see what they have, and read all about them. And you can find a disease-resistant cultivar. So that would be a great way to start your fruit tree growing journey. Now, I think you guys know this instinctively, that all trees and all plants need babying for the first, months of their life, however long, until they establish themselves, until they expand their root system. Just like a little baby needs a lot of extra care when they are young. And so fruit trees in particular, if they are neglected when they are young, they will have chronic problems in their maturity if they don't establish properly, because again, they do a lot more than native trees in terms of pumping out this amazing harvest for us. So one of the big things you need to do is, when you have a fruit tree, sometimes you buy it from the garden center, it already has fruit on it, and you're like, oh, I can't wait to taste it. Well, what you need to do is remove all the baby fruit for the first 2 years, every single piece of baby fruit. And it is short-term pain for long-term gain. You want a healthy and productive fruit tree for years to come. So you will remove all the baby fruit. And you can make that into cider vinegar. You can do what you need to, but do be compassionate and allow that fruit tree to invest its energy into its root system and expanding, rather than putting it into fruit that will feed you. Irrigation, oh my goodness, for those of us who are arborists and who work with plants, it seems like a no-brainer. For homeowners, not always. I was called to do a consultation at one point, and this man was a doctor. He couldn't figure out why his fruit trees were struggling. And I looked at the trees and I said, wow, how often do you water these trees? And he said, trees? They don't need water. Oh, so I was kind of sad, and I said, yeah, they do. I explained to him that in order for fruit trees to not be dehydrated, they need water, and that trees do take in their nutrition in a liquid form as well. So not only are thirsty fruit trees dehydrating, they're also starving. So that is an important tip for homeowners. But the other thing is how they water, because that matters. If you put a sprinkler on your fruit tree, you're wetting the leaves as well as the roots. And we all know that fruit trees and all trees take in their nourishment and their liquid mostly in their root system. So by wetting the leaves, you're actually introducing dampness in the canopy that can cause fungal diseases and other problems in the future. So you don't want to wet the leaves. You don't want to wet the trunk. Water can introduce disease into any wounding in the trunk. You just want to be watering the roots. So when the homeowner asks, well, how should I water? You can say soaker hoses are great. One fun thing that people can try is get some buckets, put some holes in the buckets at the bottom, fill up those buckets with water, and let the water just drip out slowly while they go weed somewhere else into the garden. Fruit trees need long, deep watering. Just a little sprinkle isn't enough. Imagine that while most of the roots of fruit trees are in the top, let's say 6 inches of the soil, there are others that go down much deeper, and we need it to be wet to the deepest of the roots. So the water needs to go down probably 12 inches. So if you touch the soil and you see the water's just in the top, obviously that's not going to be sufficient. So nice deep waterings. And the other thing fruit trees need is to dry out between waterings. So fruit trees, as they say, don't like wet feet. So if they're too wet, they get root rot and fungal diseases. Oh, fruit trees are so lovely, but they can be a little bit fussy. So now feeding the trees. Well, anybody who has visited homeowners who have fruit trees, they know that they love going to the garden center and picking out a fertilizer that says fruit tree fertilizer and dropping it all over the ground or using those fertilizer spikes. And that to me is a nightmare. We only want to add nutrients that the tree needs. Anything extra that we add that the tree does not need and that is already in the soil can be toxic both to the tree and to your soil. So I do not encourage anybody to get any fertilizers without having a soil test done so that they know what their soil actually needs. So if that's the case, what do you do? Sorry guys, I'm losing my voice a little bit. What you do is you encourage people in the spring to add 2 inches of compost or well-rotted manure to the circle around your tree's roots. 2 inches, you can cover it up with wood chips, but it needs some nutrients. That is enough to power spring growth. That's the marathon season for our fruit trees. They need that energy to produce their blossoms, to produce fruit. It's the busiest time of year for a fruit tree. And that nice slow release compost will feed the tree. From there on in, we really need to start considering what the soil has in it and how to optimize from there without using potions and lotions and things like that. There is a role, of course, as well for holistic sprays. I talk about that in one of my courses, but for a beginner, just suggest the homeowners always, every spring, be sure to feed their tree. Okay, the other thing you can say to a homeowner is, look, your tree can't get up and walk into, find another piece of soil where there's more nutrients that it hasn't already consumed. We need to give it nutrients. It can't go. It's not like a cat going to find a garbage can or something. Actually, I don't know if cats go to garbage cans. Maybe they do. I don't know. Anyways, and also another thing that I tell people is to remember that the tree roots extend as far as the tree's canopy and beyond. And in fact, the feeder roots are at the edge of the canopy. So that's where you really want to be adding the compost. If you've got hostas there, if you've got grass there, well, that's going to be competing for nutrition with the roots of the tree. So every year we pull back, we expand our circles, our mulch circles. Here's a young tree, but every year we expand them out to ensure that we're feeding the roots that need feeding. So as a resource for you guys, if it's something you're interested in learning more about soil, about how we can use, for instance, soil tests to unlock what, to understand what the trees need, how to interpret those tests, how to use holistic sprays. All of that is in a class that I do called Unlocking Soil Potential that you can find at orchardpeople.com. It's I think it's a 4-hour class, and there are CEU credits that you can get for it. Now, pruning, oh my gosh, that's a big one. People don't understand, and as arborists you would know that, they don't understand that the role that pruning plays in improving tree health. Now, when we are pruning native or ornamental trees, we're focusing on dead branches, diseased branches, dysfunctional branches, crisscrossed, whatever. With fruit trees, guys, we're actually pruning off healthy branches. We need to. We need to do that in order to create a structure for the fruit tree that will allow air circulation and prevent disease, and also will open up every branch so that it has access to sunshine. Why do we need to make sure that there is sun on every single branch of our fruit tree? Well, we need to know that the fruit can ripen properly. Otherwise, you get lots of hard, rock hard bitter fruit that nobody will enjoy. So, is this a well-pruned fruit tree? Is this going to produce a yummy harvest? Probably not. That's a big mess if you are growing fruit trees for the fruit, and even if you just want to keep your fruit tree healthy. Now let's look at a comparison. Is this a well-pruned fruit tree? It's very different, isn't it? It's obviously an older tree, but how do we get from here to there? And you do that by pruning off strategically healthy branches in order to create a strong fruit-bearing structure for your tree. So here are our goals, and some of you may have attended my fruit tree pruning workshops that I've done in years past. But our pruning goals when it comes to fruit trees is to create the ideal fruit-bearing structure for our tree, to make sure there is sun on all the branches for successful ripening. We can also reduce tree size if we do our pruning at the right time of year. And of course, pest and disease prevention. By improving the air circulation in the canopy, we will have a healthier fruit tree. And of course, after all those goals, we also want to remove dead, damaged, dysfunctional, and diseased branches. That too, but so much more. So if pruning is something that you want to learn, or even your clients might want to be interested in this, I do teach how to prune fruit trees in my course, Certificate in Fruit Tree Care. It is a 2-hour module in this course, but this course also talks about researching your fruit tree to find the right tree for your location, how to feed your fruit tree. It's a great overview course. It takes 8 hours to complete, and you get lots of CEU credits for that one. And for people who want to take it a step further, and I don't know if you're finding this, but people with small yards who want to grow fruit trees can do so. They can do espalier plantings or high density plantings. And in my course, Fruit Tree Pruning Masterclass, I teach pruning, all different types of fruit trees, but also high density and espalier pruning practices. Okay, so we've learned about, young tree care. We've learned about the role of pruning. Now, no matter what, pests and diseases will be a problem. I often say that fruit trees are like kids in kindergarten. They get every little disease that is going around. And that's just part of what fruit trees are. And that's part of why some arborists do not like them. But here's the deal with fruit tree pests and diseases. Let's talk about diseases. There are really only a handful of them for each type of tree. So cherry trees don't get the same diseases, as you know, as apple trees or apricots. They have different diseases. And if you know what those diseases are, and if you can recognize them right away, you can stop those problems before they spread. So my advice is to learn about fruit tree pests and diseases while your tree is still healthy. And you would do that, first of all, by monitoring your tree and watching for changes, which is a big part of fruit tree care. So you want to be looking at your trees every week. You're looking for discolored or spotty leaves, oozing goop or canker coming from the branches, crusty areas on the trunk or on the branches. And then you need to learn to identify those common fruit tree pest and disease problems. Now, I teach that in a workshop, but you can also go online and just look for what diseases do cherry trees have. And just start looking to see early symptoms. When you find a potential problem, research it and deal with it immediately, because once that problem is too widespread, it will be more difficult to cure it organically. And that's where you guys are probably just shrugging your shoulders when fruit tree owners come to you and it is so late and you think, how am I supposed to save this tree? So again, resources for you, integrated pest management for fruit trees. I call the course Managing Fruit Tree Pests and Diseases. I think that's a 4 or 6 hour course. And what you'll learn in this course is applicable to all trees and not just fruit trees, but it's teaching you all the tools you can use, not just the toxic tools, And there are many tools that we use to help and protect fruit trees that don't even involve chemicals. So if it's something that you're interested in getting into and learning about, that might be of interest to you. Now, just a word about weeding. That's us in the early years. Our trees were just planted. Boy, we had a lot of weeds to take care of. But people kind of think, well, no big deal, weeds, whatever. But actually, especially with a young fruit tree, competition can actually be deadly. So here, this is Brickworks, I think. I think it's Brickworks. But anyways, here a fruit tree, a young fruit tree was planted in a big pot, but there's nasturtiums and there's all sorts of herbs and other plants there. So who's going to get the water and the nutrition in that limited amount of soil? It's going to be a dog-eat-dog world there. Like, it's going to be quite a battle. So if you want to ensure that a fruit tree is healthy, you want to make sure that it doesn't have lots of competition. And competition can be that circle of hostas around the tree or whatever else. This is also an example, believe it or not, in there is a fruit tree. I was asked to work on those trees with some students, and we did clean it up beautifully. But the first thing we did was getting rid of the plants. Because again, this was a place where there was sidewalk right beside, limited amount of soil, and the fruit tree was competing with these other plants. Not only that, there was landscape fabric there. So nobody fed those trees ever. They were in this very terrible urban soil, no nutrition added, landscape fabric, weeds, and plants. And this can be deadly for young trees. Finally, thinning. We talked about removing all the baby fruit for the first 2 years, but after that, you do need to thin the fruit. So once you get, let's see, what picture do I have coming up? Oh, I don't have a picture coming up. So even with older trees, earlier on, I showed you a picture of apricots on an apricot tree. If you were to let all those apricots grow to full size, there would not be enough room for all of them to get to full size. So they'd be, again, fighting each other for space. If you have too many pieces of fruit on a branch, and if they're all allowed to grow to maturity, you can break the branch. And you also have to look at the size of the tree. How much fruit can it support at its age and size? So the better, if you want better quality, larger and sweeter fruit, you need to remove some of the baby fruit to allow the others to grow larger. Okay, so let's see. We are here. I've got my book that I just wrote. It's called Grow Fruit Trees Fast, and it's for people who don't have a lot of time and they want to grow fruit trees, but they want to know where they're going wrong. This would be perfect for your clients because they're busy people, they do other things, they want a successful fruit tree. If they read this, and you guys would enjoy it too, I think. From beginning to end, they'll understand what their responsibilities are as a homeowner, and also, what are the easy ways to support fruit trees to keep them healthy and productive. So I am going to see if I can figure out how to unshare my screen so we can do some questions, because I feel like I've been talking a lot and have no idea where you guys are at with this. So let me see how I do this. Okay, am I still sharing my screen?
Yes, you are.
I am, really? How interesting. Okay, well, I can be sharing it. I can leave it up, but let's see. How about, I'm still here, you're still here, we're all good.
Yep, all good.
Okay, I'd love to hear questions, comments. This has been a general talk about fruit trees, enough to hopefully give you some tips to get started. But yeah, I'd love to hear what your questions are.
Clarice has a question in the chat that says, is it a good or bad idea to get combination fruit trees?
Oh, multi-graft. Oh my God, what a great question. So here's the pros and cons of multi-graft fruit trees. Obviously, You want fruit. You have, let's say you have a small garden. Your multi-graft fruit trees will allow you to produce fruit because like I teach a 2-hour workshop just on researching fruit trees. And one of the problems is figuring out what fruit trees cross-pollinate with other fruit trees. So that's a challenge that a multi-graft tree resolves for you. Great, just get a little dwarf tree with 5 branches with 5 different types of fruit. Here's where it's a problem. The problem is when it's time to prune your tree. I told you that fruit tree pruning isn't what you think it is. It's not just removing the dead, damaged, and diseased branches. You are actually removing entire scaffold branches from the trunk of the tree. You are thinning out that tree from the inside, not doing a circle around the outside, right? That would be a kind of a disaster logically. So how do you prune these multi-graft trees? Everybody has that problem. So I'm not a super big fan. I would rather, if somebody wants to do this as a hobby, they can do a espalier planting. They could, along a fence, have 3 different types of fruit trees that will cross-pollinate, and one might produce apples in August, one in September, one in October, so you're staggering your harvest. So there is a lot of different solutions for small spaces. Again, multi-graft. Here's the other problem with multi-graft. They're going to have the popular apples. They're going to have a Red Delicious, they'll have a Granny Smith and a Honeycrisp, all the hardest trees to grow, the ones that are most vulnerable to disease. What do you do? Now, saying that, in our orchard, we had a really great grafting experience this spring, where on some of our mature trees, we had a rootstock from an apricot tree that had been diseased. We cut it down and we left the rootstock for whatever reason. So on that rootstock, we have now grafted 2 types of plums. So it's going to be a multi-graft tree. And on a Asian pear rootstock that was broken down and vandalized, that we left the rootstock, now we have 2 different types of Asian pears on that rootstock. So you can have fun with grafting, but those typical 5-in-1 dwarf multi-graft trees can be a little tricky.
A question that kind of follows up on that quite well from Isaac is, how soon can you begin espalier?
Oh, okay. Espalier, you need to think about right in advance. So espalier, if this is what you want to do, your first thing is to choose the right cultivars. So let's say you want to espalier apple trees. You need to make sure that these cultivars are spur-bearing. Some apple trees are tip-bearing, in which case every time you prune your tree, you're pruning off any potential for fruit. And you could have a beautiful tree up against your structure, but it'll produce no fruit for you. You'll need to have specific rootstocks that work in these small spaces, and you need to prune them from the very day you plant them. And in fact, I will say that with pretty much every fruit tree. When you order fruit trees from a specialist fruit tree nursery, you're going to get them bare root. That's the best way. And you're going to prune them from planting day. That way you are in charge of creating that structure. You can mold the tree into that perfect, stable, fruit-bearing structure that will last a lifetime. So interested, if it is something you're interested in espalier, you need to do your research ahead of time when you're choosing your tree, and then you prune it from the day you plant it.
For in terms of rootstock, there's a few different questions here that come up in the chat. The first one would be just generally why rootstock, why the preference in rootstock and instead of any other thing? Is it about root retention?
Oh gosh, no, rootstock. Oh my gosh, rootstock is fabulous and very important. So here's the deal. Fruit trees are like Franken trees. Okay, we want a Macintosh apple to have Macintosh apples on it. So in order to do that, we take a branch off a living Macintosh apple tree and we graft it onto a rootstock. If we take a seed from that Macintosh apple and we plant it, we'll get a really nice tree that'll produce fruit, which may taste absolutely horrible and will taste nothing like the original apple. So rootstocks give us many things, but the first thing is they give us the opportunity to choose what type of fruits and in that we are growing. But here's the beauty of them. Rootstock will also help determine the size of the tree. So you want an apple tree and you have a small backyard and you think, I can't plant a full-size apple tree that's going to grow to 40 feet tall because it'll shade out my whole garden and I can't harvest it anyway. What's the point? You would go to a specialist fruit tree nursery and order a fruit tree on either a dwarfing or a semi-dwarfing rootstock. So the rootstock will determine the mature size of the tree. And it does more than that. Rootstocks can contribute disease resistance. They can contribute early flowering, early production. You know, if you plant an apple tree from seed or any fruit from seed, it could take 7 years until you get the first harvest. And that might be 3 apples. Whereas the rootstocks are chosen because they can encourage earlier production.
Great. I think that answered the end of that answered all the other questions too. A little bit different direction then. Would you be able to expand on taking care of trees manually? So you mentioned orchid socks.
Oh, orchard socks. Okay, so orchard socks are fun. I'm surprised I don't have them in this presentation. I've got loads of versions of this presentation, and I'm so disorganized I can't figure out which is which. Orchard socks are fun. So they're also called maggot barriers, and they're not good if you have 10,000 fruit trees. You're not going to run around and cover every piece of fruit. But if you've got a fruit tree in your backyard and you got a family with kids and you got friends, you get them all to come over, you get a bag of orchard socks or maggot barriers. You can get them from Whiffle Tree Nursery and other places, I'm sure, and online. So what you do is when the fruit is just about a size of a nickel, just a little baby fruit, you slip the socket on. It's like a try-on sock. When you, I don't know if women do this too, but when you're trying on shoes in the shoe store, they give you these little try-on socks, this little nylon, so that you don't put your cooties in the shoes, right? So you tie this little socket, you pull it tight with a little knot so it doesn't fall off. Now, as the fruit grows, the sock or the nylon will expand, and it prevents insects from laying their eggs under the skin of the fruit. So we did that for our first 9 years, and we had perfect fruit. It's preventing codling moth and apple maggots. So that's great. What happened then one year was somehow things were getting in anyways. And we thought, what's going on? Are the codling moths learning about this? Are they figuring out, like, have they gotten smarter? And no, the answer is there is a pest called European apple sawfly that is a new pest here in Ontario. And when does it get in? It gets in at blossom time. It gets in at blossom time. I can't stop them with an orchard sock. So I'm like, oh no, I've got to figure out something else to do. Now, it doesn't seem to have been a long-term problem, but there are traps as well you can use with European apple sawfly. I talk about in my IPM course. So what do we use now that's manual? We use socks, orchard socks. We use traps, all sorts of traps, pest reduction traps with lures that will attract hormone lures that attract the pests, so they go fly to the trap and they die there, and all sorts of stuff. So, and pruning is also a way to manually protect your trees from pests and disease. A lot of diseases can be removed carefully and properly. If they're taken off the site and not left in the compost, then the pathogen leaves the site and the tree is protected.
Quite related to that, a question from Bridget is, could you expand on holistic sprays for feeding?
Yeah. So in my book, Grow Fruit Trees Fast, I've got a whole section on it. So holistic sprays, the one that I use, it's not what you think. It's not, it is fertilizing the tree, but the tree can only take in a little bit of nutrient. Most of the nutrients come in through the root system, but they can take in a little bit of nutrients through their leaf pores, right? Through the leaves. Now, with the holistic spray that I use, which has things like molasses in it, Epsom salts, there's a few other things I can't think of right now. But what the goal is to boost photosynthesis. So what you want is to help the leaves get greener so they can actually process more sunshine. So what happens with the holistic spray, I know it sounds a little complicated. The tree produces more sugars because of this holistic spray. The sugars are circulating in the tree and then they go down to the root system. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, you probably do. Once those sugars are in the root system, the tree dumps a large percentage of those sugars into the soil. They just throw it away. They dump the sugars into the soil. But what happens is that the soil organisms love those nutrients. They gather to gobble up the yumminess of all those sugars. And at the same time, they start processing the nutrients in the soil and releasing it in a plant available form for the fruit trees. So it's sort of like a symbiotic relationship. By giving a holistic spray, a specific type of holistic spray to your fruit tree, you're boosting photosynthesis, so it's producing more sugars, so it can enjoy some of the sugars and dump some of them in the soil. The ones in the soil will feed the organisms, and the organisms will then in turn feed the fruit tree, and everybody gets happier and happier.
On the topic of photosynthesis and photosynthetic capacity, would you be able to expand on thinning? So after the first 2 years, do you continue to thin, and how much do you thin after the first 2 years?
Thank you so much for clarity on that. So the first 2 years, easy peasy, just get rid of all the fruit. Hard as it is, right? Easy peasy. After that, you really need to use your judgment. Looking at the age of the tree, you will think, how much fruit can this tree support? You know, it's still young. I don't want to make it produce a lot, and I want those fruits to be full size. So if you can see, if this is right here is my branch. And I have, apricots do this, they have like wall to wall fruit, just tons of fruit. And it's small baby fruit. And you think, if all that fruit grows to full size, this is not going to be a good scene. Because not only is that's a lot of energy for a fruit tree to support, but those fruit, they have nowhere to grow bigger. How will these fruits ripen? So it really is up to your judgment. As you get to know your fruit tree, you'll see how much it can sustain and how much it can't. What you're looking for is quality, not quantity, in terms of fruit trees. You want really delicious, sweet, yummy fruit, not lots of crappy fruit that nobody wants to eat.
Great, thank you very much. A question back to grafting from Isaac is, would grafting different varieties onto a rootstock espalier style still be not so great? For example, the rootstock is a post and grafting at intervals on either side.
Okay, so let me think. You want to graft on an espalier. I don't see a problem with that because the espalier forces you to have a structure. You know you're keeping that branch. If you have your espalier, let's say it's just you're growing along the wires. It's a very traditional shape. There's your trunk, and then you're growing along the wires. You're going to put your grafted branch right below the wire, and then you will support it on the wire. So what you're saying is, hey, I can put different cultivars on each level. If you do that, I'd love a picture. I'd love to see how it works. The only reason it's a challenge is if that branch gets damaged and dies, you lose that cultivar. And usually if a branch will get damaged and die in an espalier, you'll just allow another bud to grow a branch, and then you'll have another fruiting branch. So your main tree will be a fruit tree, an apple tree, let's say, as well. So you would still have a branch there. You would still have to do it. But I think grafting yourself is empowering. You get to choose where that branch is, whether it is on an established tree or an espalier tree. That's different than buying a 5-in-1 where someone's imposing a structure on you on a very young tree. And where do you go with? I don't know where you go with from there.
Thank you. A question from Tara. I've read about the benefits of orchard companion planting, where you plant select species of the drip line of trees to encourage nutrients and draw in pollinators. Would companion planting actually end up competing? Can't see the bottom of the question, but competing with your plantings, I assume.
It's a fantastic question. So I am, as time goes on, learning more and more about this. I still hold that with a young tree, until it's established, you want nothing around its root system up until the drip line. I have gone places where people plant strawberries. It's like, how can I prune that tree? I'm stepping all over strawberries while I'm pruning the tree. So I do a lot of hands-on care, you know. So what I do is I mulch. Every spring, there is 2 inches of compost, perhaps covered with 2 inches of wood chips. I mulch out to the edge of the canopy. Now, I do have nitrogen fixing plants near some of my trees. So I have two Siberian pea shrubs near one of my apple trees, and we're having fun experimenting and cutting off branches at the top level, hoping it's going to kill off some roots and feed my tree. I don't see a significant difference yet, but we're trying it. But I do believe, especially with young trees, that competition is not the best idea. Once they're older, they can tolerate it more, but not young trees.
Is there a particular type of compost that you use? Where do you source your compost from?
So that is a great question. In August, I am through orchardpeople.com. I do courses, but I also do webinars, and I have a great, haven't put it on yet, but coming up is a great webinar, the difference between compost and compost. And what I have is a woman that is actually one of my students in my courses, but she is also a student, a graduate of the Soil Food Web School with Dr. Elaine. Oh, what's her last name? I call her Dr. Elaine. Anyways, so she uses microscopes to look at compost and compare and see how many living creatures are in different types of compost. So in my upcoming webinar with her, we're going to look at her home compost. We're going to see what kind of microbes are in there and what they're doing. And then we're going to see bought compost packed in a plastic bag, sitting on a shelf for God knows how long, and see what kind of creatures are in there. And my guess is probably as good as yours, but I'm thinking that there's going to be a lot of, you know, with the plastic bags, there's going to be really maybe a lot of the bad stuff in there, because the good stuff needs oxygen, right? The good organisms need oxygen. So that's going to be fun. So what type of compost do we use? I get it from a local garden center. They don't put it, it's not in bags. They dump off the compost in a big pile, and we work with that. That's because that's all I can do. We also collect leaves, and so we will have leaf mold, which is awesome for fruit trees. They love it. But we don't have a lot of choice. We can't really have a compost in our park.
In terms of wood chips, just because some wood chips will spread your fungal pathogen back into the soil and thus back into the tree, where do you source your mulch from? Is it from an arborist or is it from a garden center?
Well, I have, if anybody is anywhere near Bendelboom Park, I'm desperate to get some mulch from a willow tree. If anybody's taking down a healthy willow tree with young branches, please contact me. I'll take that mulch. Willow tree mulch has a certain type of acid in it that's really great for all fruit trees. I did a radio show and podcast about it years ago. You can listen back to it. But we buy in, or we get from the city. We get our wood chips from the city. I have wanted to get donated wood chips from local arborists, just haven't managed it. But the problem again is, if it's a diseased tree, it'll be more trouble than it's worth. So when I get compost, when I buy it in, I am assuming that this is not compost. When I buy wood chips, I'm assuming it's from healthy trees. That's the best I can do.
On the topic of compost, Todd asks, how do you feel about compost tea?
Well, the same way that I feel about compost. So compost tea is great if you do it right. And if you do it wrong, you could really be adding a lot of really bad microbes to your soil. So it's like our digestive system, like the soil is the tree's digestive system. You can have those healthy, friendly bacteria, and you can have the nasty bacteria. So if the compost that you're starting out with is bad, then you're going to have bad compost tea. Or if the compost you're starting out with is good, but you're doing it improperly, you'll still have bad and toxic tea. So people that go to Dr. Elaine's Soil Food Web School, They learn how to check a compost to see, does it have the good organisms? And they will tell you and show you and even provide you with compost tea that has been brewed properly, and they can check the compost tea to make sure it has the microbes in it that you need for your unique situation.
Fantastic, thank you. To wrap it up, because it's about 2 minutes left, perhaps a question that's here that's a little bit large scale on. We've seen recently that there's been kind of an interest in planting fruit trees in people on boulevards, in pocket parks and stuff like that, and that's kind of caused some turmoil between public interest and kind of municipal government, whether it's from urban forestry or from a risk management perspective. And would you be able to expand on kind of protecting fruit trees and getting fruit trees out there in terms of public education, community education, whether it's encouraging people to plant fruit trees and at the same time encouraging them not to pick unripe fruit and managing and harvesting those fruit trees properly?
I think there's a couple of things I want to say here. I am all about planting fruit trees only if people are going to take care of them. So people think I'm the fruit tree lady. No, I don't want you to plant a fruit tree if you're not interested in taking care of it, because your fruit tree, if you neglect it, is going to spread diseases to my fruit tree and to other people's fruit trees. So fruit trees aren't automatically a good thing. I believe every municipality should, and there was, don't know if he's a relative, Alex, there was Chris Martin was the park supervisor when I started my orchard in 2009. And he was saying, you know, I have a dream that one day the city of Toronto will have their person in charge of all the urban orchards, making sure that every urban orchard gets education and making sure that every grower has access to do it properly. If there is a fruit tree on a public boulevard and nobody's taking care of it, I'm not going to support that. Even my own orchard, what is the plan? I'm constantly training up new people. What if I move away? What if I get old? These trees can live for a long time. So this is something that we need to think about on a bigger level. This is why Alex, this is why I created my training. I didn't have that support when I started. I don't want anybody to ever be in a situation where they feel they have to spend hours until they're googly-eyed looking on YouTube and finding 10 different explanations that they're going to try and follow blindly, and who even knows if it's the right thing to do. I want to make it easy for people. So it's my passion. I want us to live sustainably, but for those people, that's also why I wrote Grow Fruit Trees Fast. It's like, buy that book if you're a homeowner before you buy your tree. Just read the book. If you're willing to do that stuff, awesome, go for it. If not, plant something else instead.
That's great. I think that gets back into adds a little bit to the right tree, right place to get into the right owner.
Yes.
With that, we're 1 minute over time. So as Bridget's just shared to everyone who's attended here today, the CEUs are automatically applied to your account if you've watched the extent of the webinar. Thank you very much, Susan, for coming out today, and thanks to all the attendees who showed up. One last thing, as always, the Canadian Tree Fund is a volunteer-run organization. We raise funds that contribute towards research and education in the fields of arboriculture and urban forestry within Canada. As part of that, we are very thankful for any donations that come in, and the donations are an opportunity if you're a corporation, if you're a company, or if you're an individual for a tax write-off. So we have a donation page set up on our website. I've just posted the link into the chat here, so you can go ahead and give as much as you would like to give. We're thankful for any donation that comes through, and rest assured that it goes back into bettering the industry for arboriculture, urban forestry in Canada. With that, again, a huge thank you to Susan, huge thank you to all the attendees who joined us today, and thank you to the ISAO who hosts our webinar series every month. Look forward to seeing people at the next webinar with Tyler Doucet. Thank you, Susan. Everyone have a good day.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.